up your engine!
Michael Earl said, what was the best American car ever made? For my money, it would be the 2013 Shelby Cobra GT500 I had for a week. It had 667 horsepower, 6-speed standard transmission, and a supercharger, and it flew. Man, that was a screaming car. I had fun driving around for a week. It's a good thing I only had it for a week, though. I got about 3 miles a gallon because I drove like a maniac, and I didn't run into anything, so that was great. But it went through a lot of gasoline, and if I would actually buy one, the insurance rates would be so high, I'm too cheap to pay for that. I wouldn't buy the car for 55 grand because I'm too cheap, and I wouldn't pay for the insurance either. Killer Hardy 600 says, my friend thinks his Dodge Charger is going to last over 100,000 miles. Can you talk about how bad they are so I can show him? You could make them last over 100,000 miles if you drove like a grandma, because they get those big V8 engines, and with some of them have 700 horsepower, right? Let's say you only drive 55 miles an hour. That thing is made so it can go close to 180 miles an hour or more, right? If you only drive at 55, it could last forever because you're not straining the engine. But of course, people that go out and buy the Chargers, they drive them like lunatics, and of course they wear out too fast. Some of that isn't just the car itself, it's the people that drive them like lunatics. But I guarantee you, if he actually drove at only 55 miles an hour, it could last 100,000 miles. Because it's made to go so fast, if you go slow, it's like a guy who goes something by, say, a Suzuki motorcycle, say a 1000cc one. And if he only drives 55 miles an hour, the thing will do 200. So if you only go 55, it'll probably last forever. But most people don't buy a motorcycle like that and drive 55 miles an hour. Heck, it'll go 55 miles an hour in first gear, and they got like 7 speeds. Jacobok says, what do you think about Rolls-Royce? Kind of an interesting question. You know, Rolls-Royce years ago bought out by BMW. They're really BMW cars now. They have V12 BMW engines in them. They bought it and then wanted the name. What happened was, Rolls-Royce made fantastic engines. You go fly around a jet airplane, a lot of them you'll see Rolls-Royce engines on it, right? Years ago, the Rolls-Royce engine, the aerospace division, split off from the cars. They all fought to get the engine for plane company because it's a great company. Nobody really wanted the Rolls-Royce cars. BMW ended up buying them. And it's a Rolls-Royce in name only. It's an expensive BMW. They're generally endless money pits. They're way overpriced, but that's what you get when you buy a snob car. Oh, I've got a Rolls-Royce that says I got so much money I don't know what to do with it. So I don't care if it costs $5,000. But they're not even really Rolls-Royces anymore. They're BMW. G37 Holly says, Scotty, my 2013 Infiniti G37 is burning oil 74,000 miles. What can I do? Well, add oil as it burns it. I tell people not to buy those things. It's now, what, 8 years old. They'll often start burning oil. The quality of Nissan and Infiniti has gone the last decade or two. They don't last like they used to. The old precursor to that would be the Nissan Maxima. The old Nissan Maximas had customers with 300,000 miles on them. They didn't burn any oil. Not the new ones. The quality of Nissan is, what you can do is use high quality oil, perhaps change the PCV valve, pray that's sucking some oil in. Sometimes it will, but if that doesn't help, just use high quality oil, add it when it goes, and change it more often. The dirtier oil is, the more oil an engine will burn because it's dirtier, creates more friction. So make sure you still change your oil every 4,000 or 5,000 miles. Ed Manman says, Scotty, I got rod knock and an 01 Solera with 350,000 miles. Engine swap or scrap it? You're better off scrapping it. With 350,000 miles, the whole thing's worn out. It's 20 years old. You get an engine, it's got to be an older engine Toyota that fits with all the computer stuff, so it's going to be worn too. I'd just scrap it. It wouldn't be worth putting that kind of money into it unless you knew somebody who imported engines from Japan and they got an old one they imported with like 30,000 miles, been sitting around for years, and they could put that in cheap, then go right ahead. But most of the engines, they're going to be old and worn out if you put another engine in it, and rebuilding it is way more than the car's worth. Anybody who knows how to rebuild those things, it's going to be 35 to 5 grand just to rebuild the engine, so it's not worth it. NTH official says, Scotty, I got a 2006 Sonata V6 with 202,000 miles. What are the weak points of the 3.3 V6 engines? The cams tend to wear on them. The last time I checked one out for a customer who wanted to buy one of those, I said, don't buy it, because I put my fancy scan tool on it. I looked at the cam data, and it showed that both of the cams, intake and exhaust, were worn about 13-14% from the data. And you don't want to buy a thing that's 13-14% the cams are worn. Eventually they're going to break, and then the engine's worth nothing, and with 202,000 miles on it, you wouldn't buy it. Now, let's say you already own it. Well, keep changing the oil every 4,000 or 5,000 miles, baby. And you never know. You're driving with found money, but I would not buy a used vehicle with that kind of mileage, especially if somebody like me checked it out and said, look, your cams are starting to wear, because they do wear on those engines with that kind of mileage. Underground 24 says, Scotty, got an 09 Volkswagen GTI of the message, stop engine, oil pressure low. What should I check or do? Well, one, you should have never bought a Volkswagen in the first place because they're endless money pits. But first thing you want to do is check your oil. Make sure it's full. Now, when it says that, if your engine still sounds normal, isn't clacking and clanging, change the oil pressure sending unit. It would just mean the oil pressure sending unit is going bad. But when it says that, if you heard the engine going clickety-clack, shut it off, don't drive it, tow it to a mechanic and see what's wrong. It could be low on oil. The oil pump could be going out. The main bearings of the engine could need rebuilding, and that will drop the oil pressure. A lot of stuff can do it. Pray that it is only the oil pressure sending unit that's gone bad, and often it is on those because the electronic sensors on Volkswagens are really cheaply made, and they often do go bad, and that's not a bad fix. You could easily go to AutoZone, buy the pressure switch and a socket, take it off and replace it yourself. Junior says, Scotty, what do you think about having a 2016 Dodge Grand Caravan SE for road trips? Bring a bunch of people on the road trip. The old joke goes, why does a Dodge Caravan hold 8 people? And the answer is because then 7 of them can push it to the repair shop while the 8th guy drives it down the road to the shop while the other 7 push. Those are one of the worst vans ever made in the history of mankind. I would not take it on a trip from here, Galveston, which is 50 miles away. I wouldn't trust it. They don't make them anymore. They finally stopped making them. You know, the soccer moms loved them, so they sold them for years, but they were really terrible vehicles. I would not take one on any kind of a serious road trip unless you were ready to just, when it breaks, get out and then thumb it and get on a bus and take the bus home. Tony Camonti said, Scotty, do GDI Toyotas have idle issues when they age? I haven't seen it yet. You know, they've been making them for a few years, the Toyotas. Theirs is a very sophisticated system. It's not just the plain stupid one like Volkswagen put in where it's directly GDI and then the intake valves clog up with carbon and you got to get a sandblaster and put walnut shells in it and clean all the carbon off the valves because it gets to be real thick. Toyota doesn't have that problem, and I haven't seen that problem yet. Toyota was one of the last companies to mass produce GDI because they wanted to see all the bugs out of the system. They didn't want to sell people a crappy system that didn't hold up and had problems. So theirs is probably the best system out there from what I've seen. Rich Wynn says, Scotty, I noticed you didn't use dielectric grease when you changed the oxygen sensor. Should you use it to keep water out and get a good connection? No, not on an oxygen sensor. Oxygen sensors put out hardly any power. Milliamps. They're only 5 volts and they're milliamps. There's hardly any power. If you put dielectric grease, it can actually mess with the power going through and give the computer wrong data on the air-fuel mixture. Never put anything on that connector. It's a very low power, 5 volt, low amperage, milliamps. You don't want to put anything on that connector because it can mess with the reading. And if it's only a few milliamps off, it can make your car run bad. Never put it on an oxygen sensor. Elite Gamer 5858 says, Scotty, how do you feel about a 2019 Ford Expedition with a 3.5 turbo for towing the trailer? Are they still better than the GM V8s? Well, you know, that'd be kind of a toss-up because I don't like those V6 dual turbo GDI EcoBoost systems. I don't like that stuff. They wear out too fast over time. Now it's 2019. It doesn't have much mileage. It's certainly got enough power for towing stuff, but from my experience, they do not hold up like a conventional V8. Now I would not buy a GM V8 late model because their quality has gone downhill. If I was going to buy a V8 engine, I'd buy a conventional Ford F-150 or I'd buy a Toyota Tundra for towing stuff. I would not buy a GM, but I wouldn't buy the Ford V6 for towing stuff. It's bad enough pulling itself that they wear out fast enough with those turbos. Fernando Sanchez says, Scotty, what's your intake on the Dodge Rams with Cummins diesel engines? Are great engines. I just had one the other day. A guy brought it over here. He was surveying my yard, and I said, what do you got in there? He said, I got the Cummins diesel. I got 350,000 miles. It still runs like a clock. Cummins diesel engines are great, and most of the Dodges with the Cummins diesels have the Allison made in Indiana automatic transmissions, which are great transmissions. Still, it's a Chrysler product and other things. The tie rods, ball joints will break. The air conditioners will break on them, but the engines and transmissions are great. Now, the problem is, a lot of the new Chryslers, they have what they call eco-diesel engines, and those are Fiat Italian diesel engines, which I've seen some of them break with as little as 60,000 miles on them. So I would not buy a late model one, but the ones with the Cummins diesels, the diesel engines, are excellent. They're made by Cummins. They're excellent engines. Charlie says, howdy, fellow Houstonian. I was torn between a used Honda Fit Yaris around 6K, and I want a reliable hatchback, won't break the bank. Any advice? All right, those are good choices. Out of those, I would actually go for the Honda Fit. because the Toyota Yaris is really a Mazda. Toyota didn't make them. Mazda made them and then just rebadged them as Toyota Yarises. Other places, they got names and all kinds. Sometimes the Hondas are Toyotas, the Mazdas are Suzukis. It's just weird. But here in the United States, the Yarises are Mazda. And the Honda Fits are excellent vehicles. If you can find one in that price range, you want to get it checked out. Yeah, you could call me and I check it out during the week, tell you if it's a good car. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.